The Patron. This is a true story from Mexico City, 1978. I'm telling you this because 9 people died exactly 1 year after I helped something I shouldn't have helped. And I'm still not sure if my mother was blessed or cursed. The night I'm about to describe changed everything. Not just for me, but for everyone who lived on my street in Colonia Agrícola Oriental, a neighborhood that didn't exist on most maps back then. What I saw that night violated every law of physics I knew. A shotgun blast that hit the shooter instead of the target, a doll that couldn't die, and my mother who opened our door at 3 in the morning to let something faceless walk into our home. They say in Mexican folklore, if you help el Patron, the boss, you'll be blessed with fortune. But those who try to kill it, they'll pay the price. I watched both outcomes. This happened in October 1978. And I still can't walk past a doll without checking if it's breathing. My name is Miguel Angel Reyes. I was 24 years old that autumn, though I felt much older. 2 weeks before that night, I'd lost my job at the textile factory on Avenida del Taller. Mass layoffs, they called it. 90 workers let go in a single afternoon, and I was one of them. The timing couldn't have been worse. We were 3 months behind on rent. Our landlord, Senor Vega, had started making threats, not the subtle kind either. He'd stand in our doorway, thick arms crossed, and say things like, "You know how many families want this house, families who can actually pay?" My mother, Esperanza, worked herself to exhaustion at the parish church, cleaning, preparing for services, helping Father Martinez with paperwork. But it wasn't official employment, no contract, no benefits. Just whatever Father Martinez could spare from the collection box, which wasn't much. I had no girlfriend, no close friends nearby. The guys I'd grown up with had either moved away for better jobs or gotten married and started families. I was stuck in that in-between place, watching everyone else's life move forward, while mine felt like it was sinking into the dirt streets of our neighborhood. So I drank. Not every night, but often enough that my mother had started leaving pamphlets from Alcoholics Anonymous on the kitchen table without saying a word. The night of October 31st, I went to a party in Tlatelolco. Not because I wanted to celebrate, but because my old friend Roberto had said he knew someone who was hiring. A factory supervisor. Good pay. I needed that job desperately. Roberto never showed up. I waited 2 hours nursing warm beers, watching strangers dance to music I didn't care about. When it became clear Roberto wasn't coming, I started drinking seriously. Not to have fun, to forget the rent we owed, to forget Senor Vega's threats. To forget the way my mother's hands had started shaking when she counted what little money we had. By 2:30 in the morning, I was drunk enough that the room tilted when I stood. I caught the last bus heading toward Central de Abastos, planning to walk the rest of the way home from there. It was the only option. I'd spent my last pesos on bus fare. No money for a taxi, and even if I'd had it, taxi drivers refused to go into our neighborhood after dark. The bus dropped me off at 3:05. 45 minutes of walking ahead of me, most of it through areas with no street lights, past abandoned lots and cornfields that the city hadn't yet paved over. I started walking. The air smelled like lead and gasoline. Cars back then ran on leaded fuel, and you could taste it at the back of your throat, metallic, sweet, toxic. Every breath felt heavy, like inhaling liquid. The streets were empty. Occasionally a car would pass its headlights, too bright in the darkness, sliding past like ghosts on the asphalt. No pedestrians, no late-night vendors. Just me, and the sound of my own footsteps on cracked pavement. Colonia Agrícola Oriental in 1978 wasn't like any neighborhood you'd recognize today. We'd moved there from Michoacan when I was 6 years old, and the earliest memories I have of Mexico City aren't of buildings or traffic, they're of absence. The house we moved into had no glass in the windows, just wooden frames with canvas tarps nailed up at night. Rats got in, stray cats, once a bat that sent my mother scrambling for a broom at 2 in the morning while I hid under the kitchen table. The corrugated metal roof lifted in the wind. On windy days, dust would rise up from the unpaved streets, and everything would turn yellow and parched like scenes from old Western films. but it was the history of the place that should have warned us. The neighborhood was built on land that had been an Aztec burial ground in the 16th century. In the 1950s, 12 construction workers died on the site under circumstances the newspapers called unexplained. In the 1960s, 3 families vanished without a trace in the same week. The locals called our area La Zona Silenciosa, the silent zone, because dogs never barked at night. Not once. You could stand in the middle of the street at midnight and hear absolutely nothing. No insects chirping, no wind, just silence so thick it felt like being underwater. Our streets weren't paved, just packed yellow dirt and gravel that turned to mud when it rained. Streetlights were spaced 100 meters apart, creating pools of absolute darkness between them. The cornfields stretched for what seemed like miles, their stalks growing 8 feet high. At night, the dry leaves rustled in the wind, creating sounds that resembled whispers, sibilant, urgent, sharp. My mother used to tell me stories about those cornfields. She'd grown up in Michoacan, in a village where everyone knew the old traditions, the old warnings. Never go into the corn at night, she'd say. Not ever. Things walk there that aren't meant to be seen. I thought it was just superstition. Village stories meant to scare children into staying close to home. But my mother had once walked through those very fields on her way home from church around 11 at night. She told me years later, when I was old enough to understand, about stepping on something soft in the darkness. A body. A dead man, still warm, lying in the middle of the path between the corn rows. She didn't scream. Fear had locked her throat shut. She just stood there in the blackness, feeling the corpse cooling beneath her shoe until her legs could move again. The smell, she'd whispered, staring at nothing. I could smell it in my nose for 3 days after. That was the kind of neighborhood we lived in. By the time I got close to home that night, it was 3:15, and I desperately needed to urinate. My house was only 3 blocks away, but my bladder screamed. I staggered behind a scraggly tree near the roadside, half hidden by bushes, and relieved myself while staring out at the cornfields. That's when I heard it, the first warning I should have heeded. Church bells. Distant, faint, but unmistakable. Church bells ringing in the middle of the night. I paused, listening. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing strangely in the empty air. But there was no church within 5 miles that had bells. The nearest one only had an electronic chime system that never rang after 10 at night. I shook my head. Must be coming from further away than I thought. Sound carries weird at night, I told myself. Must be some village celebration. Day of the Dead preparations, maybe. I zipped up and was about to step back onto the road when the second warning came. The smell of wood smoke, strong, sudden, unmistakable. The scent of burning leaves and timber so powerful it made my eyes water. I looked around, searching for the source. No smoke visible anywhere. No orange glow of fire. Just the smell, thick and cloying, hanging in the air. Must be someone burning trash in their yard, I reasoned, even though I couldn't see any fire, even though the smell had appeared out of nowhere. The rational explanations were already starting to crack, but I clung to them anyway. Then came the third warning, the one I couldn't explain away. As I walked along the edge of the cornfield, I felt it, the sensation of being watched, of someone walking parallel to me through the corn stalks, matching my pace, staying just out of sight. I stopped. The feeling stopped. I walked faster. The presence kept pace. I spun around, peering into the darkness between the stalks. "Who's there?" Silence. Just the rustle of leaves in the wind. Must be the wind, I told myself. Must be an animal. A stray dog, maybe. You're drunk, Miguel. You're imagining things. But the hair on the back of my neck stood up. My arms broke out in goosebumps despite the warm October night. Every instinct I had screamed that something was wrong, that I should run, that I should get off this road immediately. I ignored it. I kept walking. 'Cause what else could I do? I had to get home. That's when I heard the car engine. Headlights appeared in the distance, growing brighter through the dust. I pressed myself completely behind the tree instinct, telling me I didn't want to be seen urinating on the side of the road at 3 in the morning, even if nobody was around. The car came closer. An old sedan, dark-colored with headlights clouded by dust. It rolled toward me, then slowed to almost a complete stop. My heart hammered against my ribs. They couldn't see me. I was certain of that. But why were they stopping? Then I realized they were checking for witnesses. The car crept forward a few more feet and came to a complete halt maybe 20 feet from where I hid. I held my breath, pressing myself against the rough bark of the tree. Through the gaps in the bushes I could make out 2 silhouettes in the front seat, men from their size. But I couldn't see their faces. The trunk opened. Metal scraping against metal, a sound that seemed too loud in the suffocating silence of the street. The 2 men got out. I heard car doors opening and closing, footsteps on gravel, and moved to the back of the vehicle. They pulled something heavy out. They had to use both hands, grunting with effort. They threw it onto the roadside. The sound was like a wet bag hitting concrete. Heavy, final, the kind of sound that tells you immediately that whatever just hit the ground is dead weight. Then they jumped back into the car. The engine roared. Tires spun against loose dirt, throwing up a thick yellow cloud of dust that blinded me momentarily, filling my nose and mouth with the taste of earth and gasoline. By the time the dust settled, they were gone. Tail lights disappearing around a corner, leaving nothing but silence and whatever they dumped on the side of the road. I waited. 10 seconds, 20. Nothing moved. My heart was slamming so hard against my ribs I thought it might break through. My hands shook. The alcohol had burned away, replaced by cold, sharp awareness that I'd just witnessed something terrible. I should have run. I should have gone straight home, locked the door, and pretended I'd seen nothing. But I didn't. I stepped out from behind the tree legs unsteady and approached what they'd dumped. At first I thought it was garbage bags. Large black plastic bags, the kind used for yard waste. But as I got closer, the shape became clearer. Arms, legs, a body. It lay face down, one leg twisted at an odd angle that made my stomach turn like it had broken in the fall. White shirt soaked dark with something that looked brown-red in the dim light from the distant street lamp. Pants torn at the knees, fabric shredded as if dragged across rough ground. One arm was tucked under the chest, the other twisted backward at the shoulder, bent in a way arms aren't meant to bend. But the body was moving, not much, just a slight tremor, like shallow breathing or like the wind was making the back vibrate. The shirt fluttered slightly. The fingers of the visible hand twitched. This person was alive, barely but alive. I opened my mouth to shout for help, to call the neighbors, to scream for someone, anyone to come help this dying person. I didn't get the chance. A door burst open across the street with a bang that echoed like a gunshot. Carmen Dominguez, the elderly neighbor lady, the kind who's always watching through the curtains at every little sound, the unofficial guardian of the street, rushed out wearing a floral bathrobe and carrying a small flashlight. Her gray hair was in curlers. Her feet were in bedroom slippers that slapped against the ground as she ran. She must have heard the car, must have been watching from her window like always. She ran to the body, moving faster than I'd ever seen an old woman move, and knelt down beside it. She shined the light on what I assumed would be the face. Then she froze, completely froze, like someone had pressed pause on her entire body. Her face went white, not pale white, the color of old bones. Her hand holding the flashlight began to shake so violently the beam of light jumped and skittered across the ground. She stumbled backward, bringing both hands to her mouth, the flashlight falling into the dirt. "Go, son," she whispered to me, not shouting, just whispering, but with such intensity that I heard every word clearly across the distance between us. Her voice seemed to be holding back tears or screams or both. "Run, right now. Go home." I stood there paralyzed, unable to move. I didn't understand why she was so terrified. It was just an injured person, wasn't it? Someone who needed help, needed an ambulance, needed... It's El Patron. Carmen breathed, trembling so hard her whole body shook. Run, boy. It's still alive. El Patron. What was that? The boss whose boss I turned to look at what she'd seen. Carmen's dropped flashlight still pointed toward the body, its beam illuminating the upper half. I saw it this time. Really saw it. There was no face. Not in the way faces should exist. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, no features at all. Just a smooth, flat surface made of cloth skin stretched tight over whatever was underneath. Thick stitches ran across it in crossing patterns like black veins, like surgical scars that had never healed properly, like something sewn together by hands that didn't care about making it look human. This wasn't a person. This was a doll. A life-sized doll made of fabric and stuffing and God knows what else. But it was breathing. I could see the chest rising and falling slow and steady like something sleeping, and then it started to stand up. I want you to understand how it moved because that image will haunt me until I die. It's burned into my brain like a brand. I see it sometimes when I close my eyes. I see it in nightmares. It didn't stand up like a person stands. There was nothing natural about the movement, nothing organic. It was pulled upward like a puppet. First, the arm jerked up with an unnatural snap, as if someone was yanking invisible strings attached to the wrist. The elbow didn't bend right. It bent backward first, then forward like the joint was installed wrong. Then the legs. One twisted forward in a sharp motion. The other coiled beneath the body, providing leverage for the thing to push itself up. But the movement was wrong. The knee bent sideways for a moment, before snapping into the correct position. The torso rotated last, not like a body rotating from the waist, like an object being spun by a giant unseen hand gripping the spine. The shoulders jerked left, then right, then centered themselves with an audible crack. And then it was standing there fully upright, swaying slightly like a drunk person trying to maintain balance. Blood, someone's blood, not its own because it had no blood drip from its white shirt. The fabric was soaked through, stained brown, red, and black in the dim light. More blood dripped from its cloth hands, pattering onto the dirt road with soft tapping sounds. The faceless head turned slowly toward us, toward me and Carmen, scanning. Searching. Even without eyes, I could feel it looking at us. Carmen grabbed my arm with a strength I didn't know an elderly woman could possess. Her fingers dug into my bicep like claws, nails biting through my shirt into skin. She dragged me toward her house, half running, half stumbling. I was too shocked to resist. My legs moved automatically following her lead, while my brain struggled to process what I'd just seen. "It's still alive," she panted as we ran, "and if it catches you—" She didn't finish the sentence. But I understood. Carmen's door was still open. We lunged inside. She slammed it shut behind us and immediately started throwing deadbolts. 3 of them, click, click, click. Heavy metal sliding into metal housings with sounds that felt far too fragile for what they were supposed to keep out. Then she stood there leaning against the door, gasping for air. Her face was slick with sweat. Her hands still shook. I stood in her living room, lit by a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling on a frayed cord, trying to process what I'd just seen. The bulb swung slightly in a draft I couldn't feel, making shadows slide across the walls like living things. My hands shook. My legs felt weak. The alcohol in my system had evaporated, completely burned away by cold, sharp fear that felt like ice water in my veins. Outside there was silence. No dogs barking. Not a single sound. No cars. No wind. No insects. It was as if the entire neighborhood had been switched off like a radio. We stayed quiet, too, both of us breathing hard, listening. Carmen moved slowly to the window by the living room, the one she always watched the street from, the one with the worn spot on the sill where she rested her elbows day after day and carefully moved the curtain aside with one finger. She looked out. Her breath caught. She didn't move for several seconds. I walked over to join her, moving slowly, afraid of what I'd see. The thing was still there, standing in the middle of the street exactly where it had risen. Not moving, not walking. Just standing perfectly still like a statue someone had placed there as a joke. Its faceless face was turned toward our house, as if it knew we were inside, as if it could see us through walls, through curtains, through the very air itself. Carmen dropped the curtain and stepped back, crossing herself rapidly. Ave Maria Purissima, she whispered over and over like a mantra. Ave Maria Purissima, sin pecado concebida. I'm not religious, never have been. My mother dragged me to church every Sunday when I was young, but the prayers never took hold. I stopped going the moment I was old enough to say no. But hearing Carmen pray, hearing the terror in her voice as she called on the Virgin Mary for protection, made me more scared than anything else, because it meant she was terrified of this thing. Genuinely deeply terrified. And Carmen Dominguez wasn't afraid of anything. She was the woman who chased off stray dogs with a broom, who argued with police officers when they tried to shake down street vendors, who once threw a pot of boiling water at a thief trying to break into her neighbor's house. If Carmen was afraid, that meant this was real. That meant the thing outside wasn't some drunk person in a costume, wasn't some prank, wasn't something explainable. "Do you know what El Patron is?" she asked me, finally tearing her eyes away from the window to look at me. I shook my head, not trusting my voice. Carmen sat down heavily in an old armchair, the springs squeaking under her weight. Her hands were still trembling. She clasped them together in her lap, squeezing hard, trying to make them stop. "It's something from the village," she said quietly. "From Michoacan. From where I come from. From where your mother was born." She took a shaky breath and continued. "Every year someone pays for the festival. A wealthy family, usually. They hold a great celebration, fireworks, music, dancing, food for everyone in the village. They bring out El Patron, a doll, life-size, made of cloth and straw and animal blood. They dress it in fine clothes, white shirt, black pants, sometimes a hat. They place offerings before it, bottles of mezcal, fresh bread, flowers, candles." Her voice had taken on a strange quality, like she was reciting something memorized long ago. "They dance around it all night. Traditional dances, old dances, dances from before the Spanish came. The music plays loud enough to wake the dead. And at midnight, when the church bells ring 12 times, it happens." She paused, swallowing hard. "It stands up, by itself. Nobody touches it. Nobody pulls any strings or works any mechanism. It just stands up and starts walking." I stared at her, trying to understand, trying to fit this into any framework of reality that made sense. "And then people run," she continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "The people who paid for the festival, they run. They run through the village streets, through the cornfields, anywhere they can. And El Patron chases them. If it catches you," she said, looking at me with eyes that had seen things I couldn't imagine, "you die, usually torn apart, ripped in half like paper. Sometimes just a broken neck, quick and clean, but always dead. But if you escape, if you outrun it until sunrise, you're blessed. Money comes to you, health, good fortune for the whole year. Your crops grow better, your animals stay healthy, your children thrive. And if you help El Patron," she stopped, her eyes going distant, "if you give it food, shelter, protection when it needs it, you get double the blessing. Everything you touch turns to gold for a year." My mouth had gone completely dry. "But if you try to kill it," Carmen's expression darkened. "If you try to kill it, you're cursed. You die within the year, always, no exceptions." "But why is it here?" I managed to ask. "Why in Mexico City? Why not in the village?" Carmen shook her head slowly. "Someone must have brought it. Someone from the village who knew the ritual, who wanted to bring the tradition here. Or maybe it followed someone. Someone who ran from it but didn't escape. Someone it's still hunting." A cold hand seemed to grip my spine. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her words settling over us like a burial shroud. Then I felt it. Something ice-cold touched my ear. Just a light brush, like a frozen finger running along my earlobe, tracing the curve of flesh and cartilage with deliberate slowness. I spun around, heart exploding into overdrive. Ricardo Dominguez, Carmen's husband, a man I'd barely exchanged 10 words with in all the years we'd been neighbors, stood directly behind me, close enough that I should have heard him approach. Close enough that I should have felt his presence. He held a 12-gauge shotgun. The barrel was pointed directly at my head, so close I could see the dark hollow of the muzzle, could smell the gun oil and old powder residue. Carmen was on the floor. I hadn't even noticed her fall. She was curled up, hands over her head, sobbing silently. I threw my hands up immediately, nearly losing my balance in my haste. "No, I'm not. I'm not a thief. I'm not robbing you." "Quiet." Ricardo's voice was low, calm, completely controlled. The voice of a man who'd held guns before, who knew how to use them. But I could see his finger on the trigger, could see the tension in his jaw. "Ricardo!" Carmen screamed from the floor, her voice breaking. "Not him. He's our neighbor. We're hiding, both of us." Ricardo's eyes, dark, unreadable, didn't leave mine. "Hiding from what?" Carmen swallowed hard, trying to get her breath back. "El Patron." I saw something flash across Ricardo's face. Not confusion, not disbelief, recognition. He knew that name. His generation knew it. The old people from Michoacan, they all knew the stories. They'd all grown up with the warnings. He lowered the gun slightly, not all the way, but enough that I wasn't staring directly down the barrel anymore. "Where is it?" Carmen pointed toward the window with a shaking hand. Ricardo walked to it slowly, each step deliberate, and pushed the curtain aside with the barrel of the shotgun. He stared out for a long moment, completely still. I saw his shoulders tense, saw his grip on the gun tighten. Then, without a word, he opened the front door and stepped outside. "Ricardo, no!" Carmen shrieked, scrambling to her feet. "Don't go out there, please!" But he was already gone, disappearing into the darkness beyond the doorway. Carmen looked at me, her eyes wild with fear. We both knew we couldn't let him face it alone. Not because we were brave, not because we thought we could help, but because being inside alone, not knowing what was happening, felt worse than anything we might see outside. We ran after him. Ricardo stood in the middle of the street, shotgun raised to his shoulder, aimed at the darkness ahead. The weapon looked old but well-maintained, its wooden stock worn smooth from years of handling. His stance was solid, practiced. This wasn't the first time he had pointed a gun at something dangerous. The air had changed since we'd gone inside. It was colder now, suddenly unnaturally cold. My breath became visible in front of my face, white vapor curling in the air, even though it was late October and the temperature had been mild all evening. The kind of cold that comes from inside, from something fundamentally wrong with the space around you. Carmen and I stood behind Ricardo, close enough to feel marginally protected by his presence, far enough to run if things went bad. And then I saw it. El Patron stepped out of the darkness. Not from any specific place, not from behind a building or from within the cornfields. It emerged from the darkness itself, as if shadow were a door it could open and close at will. One moment there was empty street. The next moment it was there, solid and present, as if it had always been standing there and we'd simply failed to notice. It walked with that same jerking puppet motion I'd seen before, arms swinging limply at its sides, not moving naturally with the stride, but dangling like broken things. Legs dragging slightly each step, seeming to require enormous effort, as if gravity affected it differently than it affected normal matter. The dried blood on its white shirt had turned black in the limited light. More stains covered its cloth hands, its pants, even its shoes, but none of it was its own blood, because it had no blood. It was just fabric and stuffing and whatever dark force animated it. But it was getting closer. Each awkward step bringing it nearer to where we stood. El Patron stopped, 10 feet away from us. Close enough that I could see the details of its construction in the dim light from the distant street lamp. The stitching wasn't neat. It was crude, rushed, like someone had sewn it together in a hurry without caring about appearance. The fabric of its face was pulled too tight in some places, too loose in others, creating an unsettling topography of wrinkles and smooth patches. No face. Just that smooth plane of cloth with thick black stitching running across it like surgical scars. Like someone had tried to give it features and failed, leaving only the marks where features should have been. But I could feel it looking at us. Despite the absence of eyes, despite the complete lack of any sensory organs, I could feel its attention focused on us like a physical weight pressing against my chest. Ricardo's voice rang out loud and commanding, "Turn back, I'll shoot!" I swear to God, I'll shoot you. El Patron didn't move, didn't react, didn't acknowledge the threat in any way. The silence stretched out thick and suffocating. I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears, could hear Carmen's rapid breathing beside me, could hear the faint creaking of Ricardo's finger tightening on the trigger, and then it did something I still can't explain, something that defied every understanding of how bodies move, how joints work, how physics operates. It convulsed. The entire body jerked at an impossible angle as if every joint had suddenly reversed direction simultaneously. Head tilted sharply to the right far past the point where a neck should break. Shoulders twisted forward and down, rotating in opposite directions from each other. Arms bent at the elbows like broken wings. Fingers splaying out at angles that made my stomach lurch. The spine arched backward, then forward, then sideways movements that should have torn the thing apart, but instead just made it look more wrong, more inhuman, more like something that had learned about human movement from a broken instruction manual. We all stumbled backward. The wrongness of the movement triggered something primal in my brain, some ancient instinct that screamed danger in a voice older than language. Carmen screamed a high, sharp sound of pure terror, and Ricardo fired. The gunshot was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. It didn't just ring out, it exploded a massive crack of sound that seemed to rip through the fabric of the night itself. The muzzle flash lit up the entire street for a split second, bright as lightning, turning everything into stark white and black shadows. I saw the spray of pellets leaving the barrel. I swear to God, I saw them, a spreading cone of glittering metal in that brief flash of light, dozens of lead shot flying through the air at speeds too fast for the eye to follow. But somehow I saw them anyway. Saw them traveling the 10 feet between Ricardo and El Patron, saw them heading straight for the doll's chest. But they never touched it. Instead, I heard something else, a wet slamming sound. The sound of flesh and bone being destroyed. The sound of meat being torn apart by high-velocity metal. Blood sprayed. Ricardo's blood. It fountained from his right wrist where his hand used to be in a thick red arc that splashed across the dirt road and onto my shoes and pants. The spray was hot. I could feel the warmth of it soaking through my clothes, could smell the copper iron scent of fresh blood mixing with the gun smoke. Ricardo's hand lay on the ground 3 feet away from him, 3 feet in the completely wrong direction from where the gun had been pointed. It still gripped the shotgun fingers locked around the wood and metal in a death grip that wouldn't release even though it was no longer attached to anybody. The shotgun itself had fallen when the hand fell, landing in the dirt with a dull thud. Ricardo stood there staring at the stump where his right hand used to be. Just staring. His face had gone completely blank, shock overwhelming every other response. No hand, just ragged meat and white bone and blood, so much blood pumping out in rhythmic spurts that matched his heartbeat. He didn't scream, didn't cry out, didn't make any sound at all, just stood there staring as his blood poured onto the ground, creating a dark pool that spread across the packed dirt. El Patron remained exactly where it had been, standing 10 feet away, unharmed, not a scratch on it. Not a single pellet hole in its clothing, not even a mark. But now it was covered in Ricardo's blood. Fresh blood splattered across its white shirt, turning the fabric red and black. Blood dripping from its cloth fingers, pattering onto the ground in a steady rhythm. Blood on its faceless face, dark streaks running down the smooth fabric like tears. Blood that wasn't its own. Blood that it had no right to wear, because it had no blood of its own. because it was just cloth and stuffing and whatever unholy thing animated it. Carmen and I were screaming. I don't remember starting, but suddenly I was screaming a sound of pure horror and incomprehension ripping from my throat. Carmen's screams mixed with mine, higher-pitched, more desperate. I grabbed Ricardo's left arm, the one that still had a hand, and yanked my belt off with my free hand, fingers fumbling with the buckle. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely work the leather free from the loops. I wrapped the belt around Ricardo's upper arm above the elbow, pulling it as tight as I could. The leather bit into his flesh. I pulled tighter, using all my strength until the blood flow slowed from a fountain to a steady stream. "We have to get him to a hospital," I shouted at Carmen, my voice cracking. "Right now he's going to bleed out." Carmen nodded frantically, already running back toward her house. "I'll get the keys, I'll get the keys." I held Ricardo upright, supporting his weight as his legs started to buckle. He was going into shock, his body shutting down in response to the trauma. His skin had gone pale, almost gray in the dim light. Cold sweat covered his face. I turned back to look at El Patron, unable to help myself, needing to know where it was, what it was doing. It was walking away, not toward us, not chasing, not moving to attack, just walking, slowly, deliberately, each step that same awkward puppet-like motion, as if the force animating it was struggling to remember how human locomotion worked. It walked toward the shadows between empty houses, toward the cornfields that bordered our street, moving with purpose toward some destination only it knew, as if it had finished what it came to do, as if we were no longer relevant to whatever mission drove it. I looked down at Ricardo's severed hand, still clutching the shotgun. The fingers were locked tight around the grip knuckles, white tendons standing out under the skin. Blood still oozed from the ragged stump of the wrist, dripping onto the gunmetal. How did the pellets travel from the gun toward the doll, but Ricardo's arm got blown off instead? The physics made no sense. The cause and effect were completely reversed. The gun had been pointed at El Patron. The trigger had been pulled. The pellets had left the barrel, traveling toward the target. But the damage had manifested on Ricardo's body instead. Carmen burst out of her house, clutching a key ring that jangled with every step. "The car!" "Help me get him to the car." Their vehicle was an old Datsun, probably 15 years old. Rusted in patches, the blue paint faded to a pale ghost of its former color. It sat at the curb in front of their house, one tire slightly flat, the passenger side mirror held on with duct tape. We half-carried, half-dragged Ricardo to it. He was barely conscious now, his feet dragging his head, lolling. I got the back door open and we maneuvered him onto the seat, laying him down as carefully as we could manage in our panic. Carmen climbed into the driver's seat, then froze. "I can't drive," she said, her voice small and helpless. "I never learned. Ricardo always drove." I looked at the keys in her shaking hand, then at Ricardo bleeding in the back seat, then back at her. "I'll drive," I said, though the words felt unreal. I was still drunk, or I had been. The alcohol seemed to have burned away in the adrenaline and terror. But I couldn't be sure. My hands were shaking. I'd never driven a car this old. I barely knew how to drive at all. But there was no choice. Carmen moved to the passenger seat. I got behind the wheel, adjusting the seat forward because Ricardo had longer legs than me. The interior smelled like old vinyl and cigarette smoke, and now overwhelming everything else blood. I turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, almost died. I tried again, pumping the gas pedal. The engine caught on the third try, rattling to life with a sound like rocks in a tin can. I put it in gear and pulled away from the curb tires, crunching on gravel. In the rearview mirror, I checked on Ricardo. Carmen had climbed into the back seat with him pressing both hands against the belt tourniquet, trying to slow the bleeding further. And then I saw something else in the mirror. A figure. Standing on the street behind us, getting smaller as we drove away. Faceless. Still. Watching our departure with a tension that I could feel even at increasing distance. I pressed the accelerator harder. The Datsun's engine whined in protest, but the speedometer needle climbed. 30 kilometers per hour, 40, 50. The figure disappeared from view as we turned a corner. My hands were shaking so badly on the steering wheel that the car weaved slightly, drifting toward the center line before I corrected. I kept stalling at intersections, forgetting to press the clutch, the engine dying with embarrassing regularity. Each time I had to restart it, precious seconds ticking away while Ricardo bled in the back seat. I took a wrong turn, ended up on a street I didn't recognize, had to backtrack. The unfamiliar streets of early morning Mexico City all looked the same, empty, dark, threatening. Every shadow seemed to hide something. Every alley seemed to watch us pass. The smell of blood filled the car, thick and nauseating. Mixed with it was the smell of gunpowder still clinging to our clothes. Carmen kept talking to Ricardo, her voice rising in pitch as panic set in. "Stay awake, Ricardo! Stay awake! Don't close your eyes! Please don't close your eyes!" But his eyes were already half closed, his breathing shallow and rapid. He was going into hypovolemic shock, his body shutting down as it lost too much blood too quickly. I ran a red light. There were no other cars anyway. The entire city seemed deserted, as if we were the only people left alive in Mexico City. 20 minutes into the drive, though it felt like hours, I glanced in the rearview mirror again to check on Ricardo. And I saw it. Not Ricardo, not Carmen. Behind them, visible through the rear window. A handprint. On the outside of the glass. A handprint that hadn't been there before I was certain of it. Fingers spread wide, palm pressed flat against the window as if someone had grabbed onto the car while we were moving. But we were going 50 kilometers per hour. Nobody could have touched the car. Nobody could have kept pace with us on foot. The print looked wrong anyway, too large, fingers too long, and dark as if made with charcoal rather than skin oil. I tried to look away to focus on the road, but my eyes kept being drawn back to that handprint in the mirror. It seemed to pulse in my peripheral vision, growing darker, more defined, as if whatever had made it was pressing harder, leaning its weight against the glass. I forced myself to focus on driving, on getting to the hospital, on not stalling the engine again, on anything except the handprint on the rear window that absolutely should not exist. We reached Hospital General de Zaragoza at 4:20 in the morning. The building was a concrete monstrosity from the 1950s, 6 stories of brutalist architecture, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that made everything look pale and sickly. I pulled up to the emergency entrance, not bothering to park properly, just stopping the car in the middle of the drop-off lane. I jumped out, ran to the doors, and shouted, "We need help! He's bleeding out! Somebody help us!" A nurse appeared, immediately saw me, covered in blood, and yelled something over her shoulder. Suddenly there were people everywhere, 2 orderlies with a stretcher, another nurse, a doctor in rumpled scrubs who looked like he hadn't slept in days. They pulled Ricardo from the back seat with practiced efficiency, got him onto the stretcher. One of the nurses cut away the belt tourniquet I'd applied, replacing it with a proper medical tourniquet higher up on his arm. The doctor was barking orders in rapid-fire Spanish, too technical for me to follow. They wheeled Ricardo through the automatic doors at a run, the stretcher's wheels clattering on the linoleum floor. Carmen tried to follow, but a nurse stopped her at the entrance to the treatment area. "You can't go back there. We'll do everything we can. Please wait here and fill out these forms." The nurse thrust a clipboard with papers at Carmen, then disappeared through the swinging doors after the stretcher. Through the small windows in the doors, I could see a flurry of activity. People in scrubs moving quickly, machines being wheeled into position, bright lights snapping on. Then the door swung shut and we couldn't see anymore. Carmen stood there holding the clipboard, staring at the closed doors with an expression of complete helplessness. She was shaking. We both were. I looked down at myself. My clothes were soaked with Ricardo's blood. My hands were covered in it, dried brown under the nails sticky between the fingers. The smell was overpowering now that we were out of the car, now that I didn't have driving to focus on. Carmen moved slowly to a row of plastic chairs in the waiting area and sat down heavily. The clipboard fell from her hands onto her lap. She just stared at it, not moving to fill out any forms, not doing anything except breathing and staring. I remained standing near the glass entrance doors, looking out at the Datsun still parked haphazardly in the drop-off lane. The rear window was visible from here. In the harsh fluorescent light spilling out from the hospital, I could see it clearly. The handprint was gone. The glass was clean. No mark, no smudge, no evidence that anything had ever touched it. I walked outside, slowly approaching the car like it might suddenly attack me. Reached the rear window. Put my own hand up to the glass, comparing. Nothing. Clean glass. Not even the normal smears and dust that accumulate on car windows. It was spotless, as if it had just been washed. But I'd seen it. I'd seen the handprint in the mirror, seen it as clearly as I'd seen anything that night. Either I was losing my mind or something had been with us in that car. Something that could touch physical objects, leave marks, but could also erase those marks when it chose to. Inside, Carmen was being approached by a hospital administrator with more forms. I could see them through the glass. Carmen nodding numbly, accepting papers she probably couldn't read through her tears. I should have gone back inside. Should have been there to support her, to help with the paperwork, to do something useful, but I couldn't stop staring at that clean rear window, and then I remembered. My mother, Esperanza, home alone. The thought hit me like a physical blow. How had I forgotten? How had I let myself get so caught up in Ricardo's emergency that I'd stopped thinking about my own mother? Our house was 3 blocks from where we'd encountered El Patron. 3 blocks from where that thing had emerged from shadow and demonstrated that it could redirect violence, could make the laws of physics bend to its will. And our back door didn't have a lock. Just a simple latch that could be opened from outside with minimal effort. We'd been meaning to install a proper lock for months, but locks cost money we didn't have. If El Patron went to our house, if it wanted to get inside, there was nothing to stop it. I looked back at Carmen through the glass. She was signing forms now, the administrator pointing at different lines, her hand moving mechanically to write her name over and over. She'd be okay here. Ricardo was getting treatment. There was nothing more I could do for them right now. But my mother, I started walking away from the hospital, then jogging, then running. Carmen's voice reached me from behind, muffled by the glass. "Miguel, where are you going? Miguel, come back. Don't go out there alone." But I was already gone, legs pumping, arms swinging, running faster than I'd run since I was a child, being chased through these same streets by neighborhood bullies. The night air hit my lungs cold and sharp. My dress shoes, worn thin at the soles, bought years ago for a job interview at a factory that had since closed, slapped against the pavement in an unsteady rhythm. I ran for 30 seconds, then had to slow to a fast walk as my lungs burned. I wasn't in shape for this. Too much drinking, too many nights sitting idle because there was no job to wake up early for. My body protested every step, but I kept moving. Walk fast for a minute until I caught my breath, then run again for as long as I could manage, then walk, then run. The streets were still empty, still silent. The entire world felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. And underneath everything else, faintly but persistently, that smell returned. Wood smoke, not as strong as before, but there. A ghost of the warning I'd ignored earlier. I was 15 minutes from the hospital when I heard them again. Church bells. The same ones I'd heard earlier in the night before everything went wrong. Ringing clearly now, closer, louder. They weren't distant anymore. They sounded like they were coming from just a few blocks away. But I knew every church in this area. There was no church with bells within a mile of where I was running. The bells rang in a pattern, not random, not the regular ringing of calling people to service. This was something else. A rhythm I didn't recognize, old and purposeful, like a code being transmitted through the night. They were getting louder as I ran, getting closer, as if the source of the sound was moving, matching my pace, staying always just out of sight but near enough to hear. I wanted to stop running, wanted to hide somewhere, find a phone that worked, call the police, even though I knew they wouldn't believe me, wouldn't come, wouldn't help. But I kept running because my mother was alone and something unholy was loose in the streets, and I was the only person who could warn her. The neighborhood came into view, the familiar shapes of low buildings, the unpaved streets. Almost home, almost there. I was going to have to go through the cornfields, the shortcut, the path that cut travel time from 10 minutes down to 3, the path my mother had always warned me never to take at night. I stopped at the edge of the field, breathing hard, hands on my knees. The cornstalks stood 8 feet tall, their dry leaves rustling together with sounds like whispered conversations. The narrow path through them disappeared into darkness after about 10 feet. 10 minutes if I went around, 3 minutes if I cut through. My mother was alone. Every second counted. I entered the cornfield at a run. The corn stalks towered above me on both sides, their dry leaves scraping together in the windless night. That whispering sound, sibilant, urgent, sharp, seemed to follow my movement as if the field itself was commenting on my passage through it. I couldn't see more than 3 feet ahead. Just row after row of thick stalks, leaves hanging like curtains, the packed dirt path barely visible beneath my feet. Above me, only a narrow strip of dark sky showed through the gap between the towering plants. I ran as fast as I dared, arms held up to push through the leaves that reached out to scratch at my face and hands. My breath came in ragged gasps. The blood on my clothes had dried into stiff patches that cracked when I moved. That's when I heard it. Movement in the corn. Not my movement. Something else. Footsteps. Running parallel to me, maybe 10 feet to my left, keeping pace exactly with my speed. When I sped up, they sped up. When I slowed for breath, they slowed too. I stopped completely, heart-hammering, and listened. The footsteps stopped. Silence, except for the rustling leaves and my own ragged breathing. I started moving again, slower now, trying to be quiet. The footsteps resumed, closer this time, 5 feet away maybe. Just on the other side of a thin wall of corn stalks. I could hear breathing now, heavy, labored, like someone who'd been running for a very long time. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice cracking. "Roberto, is that you?" No answer, just breathing and footsteps. I pushed through the corn toward the sound, needing to see what was following me, needing to confirm it was just another person, just another drunk, heading home, just... The footsteps suddenly accelerated, breaking into a sprint, moving away from me now, ahead of me, circling around toward the path in front of me. And then came the scream. Not a scream of fear, a scream of agony. High-pitched, raw, the sound of a human throat being pushed beyond its limits, so loud and so close that I felt it vibrate in my chest. The scream cut off abruptly, replaced by a wet, tearing sound, like fabric being ripped, but deeper, more organic. I froze, every muscle in my body locked. My brain was screaming at me to run, to turn around, to get out of this field immediately. But my legs wouldn't move. I just stood there in the narrow path between the corn, listening to that wet, tearing sound continue for seconds that felt like hours. Then silence again, complete silence. Even the leaves had stopped rustling. Something warm and metallic smelling drifted through the corn on a breeze that shouldn't exist. Blood. The smell of fresh blood mixed with the smell of bowel and organs. The smell of death. My legs finally remembered how to work. I started moving forward because going back would take just as long, and whatever had screamed was somewhere behind me now. I pushed through the corn faster now, not caring about the leaves scratching my face, drawing blood from thin cuts across my cheeks and forehead. Just moving, just getting through, my foot hit something soft, not dirt, not a plant root, something that gave way under my weight, something that shouldn't be in the middle of this path. I tried to catch myself, but my momentum was too great. I went down hard, hitting the packed earth with my elbows and knees, pain shooting through both joints. For a moment, I just lay there, stunned, trying to understand what had happened. Then I looked down at what I'd stepped on. A woman, or what remained of one. She was torn in half, not cut, not sliced with a blade, torn, ripped apart like someone had grabbed her upper and lower body and pulled in opposite directions until the spine snapped and the flesh gave way. The top half torso, head, arms lay directly in front of me. maybe 3 feet away, close enough that I could see her face in the dim light filtering through the corn. Her eyes were open wide, staring at nothing. Her mouth hung open in an expression of terminal surprise. The bottom half leg's hips lay about 6 feet away, connected to the top half by strings of tissue and intestine that stretched between them like obscene rope. She was still warm. I could feel the heat radiating from the body. This had happened minutes ago, maybe seconds ago. The wet tearing sounds I'd heard. This is what they'd been. Someone being ripped in half while I stood frozen in the path, too terrified to move or help or do anything except listen. I recognized her. Maria Espinoza, mid-40s, lived 2 blocks from us. Always smiled when she saw me at the market, always asked about my mother. Her flowered dress was soaked red. Her body was shredded at the waist where she'd been torn apart. Ribs protruded from the meat of her torso, white bone visible through dark flesh. My stomach heaved. I rolled to the side and vomited into the corn, my body rejecting everything in it, alcohol and bile burning my throat as it came up. When I was done, when there was nothing left to throw up, I wiped my mouth with a shaking hand and looked at Maria again. Something had done this to her. Something with enough strength to tear a human being in half. Something that had been running through this cornfield just moments ago. Something that might still be here. That thought got me moving again. I scrambled to my feet, careful not to touch Maria's body, and started running. Really running now, sprinting through the corn path without any regard for the branches, whipping my face, the roots trying to trip me, the darkness making every step uncertain. I just ran like death itself was behind me, because maybe it was. The corn ended abruptly, and I burst out onto the street, stumbling slightly as packed dirt transitioned to gravel. I caught myself against a wall, gasping for breath, looking back at the dark entrance to the field. Nothing followed me. No movement in the corn. No sounds except the eternal rustling of leaves. But Maria was still in there, dead, torn in half, and I was the only one who knew. I should have gone for help. Should have found someone with a phone, called the police, reported what I'd found. But there was no time. My house was 2 blocks away. My mother was alone. I ran those final 2 blocks without stopping, my lungs burning, my legs threatening to give out. Past houses with their lights off, curtains drawn, residents sleeping through the nightmare unfolding in their neighborhood. Our house appeared ahead, the same house I'd left hours ago. The house with its faded blue paint and metal roof. And the front door was open, not wide open, just partially open. 6 inches of darkness visible between the door and the frame. My heart dropped into my stomach. No. I covered the last 50 feet at a dead sprint and burst through the door, not bothering to be quiet, not bothering to check if it was safe. Mama. I shouted. Mama! Silence. The house absorbed my voice and gave nothing back. The living room was exactly as I'd left it hours ago. The old sofa with its faded cushions, the television that only got 3 channels, the small coffee table with a cup sitting on it. I touched the side of the cup. Still warm. She'd been here recently. Mama, where are you? I checked her bedroom. The bed was made undisturbed. She hadn't slept in it tonight. The bathroom empty, the kitchen empty. Back to the living room, and that's when I saw it. A mark on the wooden floor, right behind the front door. A dark stain that hadn't been there this morning. I knelt down to look at it more closely. Not blood, not dirt, something else. Charcoal, or soot. A dark smudge in the rough shape of an oval about the size of a dinner plate. As if something very hot had stood in that spot for a long time, burning its outline into the wood. The edges of the mark were darker than the center, creating a gradient that suggested heat distribution. Actual scorch marks radiated out from it in thin lines like cracks in glass. Something had stood here, something hot enough to burn wood through sustained contact, and recently enough that I could still smell the faint scent of charred wood. I touched the mark with my fingertips, still slightly warm. My mother had been here. She'd made coffee. And then what? Had she opened the door? Had something come in? I ran back outside, looking up and down the street. Mama Esperanza. My voice echoed off the buildings and died in the distance. No response. Other doors were open, not just ours. I hadn't noticed before in my panic, but now I saw them. The house to our left door hanging open, lights on inside. The house across the street, same thing. The next house down door open, interior visible. I ran to the nearest one, the house belonging to Don Esteban, an old man who'd lived in the neighborhood since before I was born. Don Esteban, are you here? I pushed the door fully open and stepped inside. The living room was in disarray. A chair knocked over, a radio still playing nothing but static hissing from the speaker. Coffee cups on the table still steaming, a plate of food, half-eaten fork lying on the floor, but no people, no blood, no signs of violence beyond the overturned chair, just absence. Like everyone had suddenly vanished mid-activity, called away by something they couldn't ignore or resist. I backed out and ran to the next house. Same story, lights on, door open, signs of recent occupation, no occupants, every house on the block, every single one, empty. The entire neighborhood had disappeared. I stood in the middle of the street, slowly turning in a circle, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. Easily 100 people lived on these few blocks. Families with children, old couples, single workers like me. They couldn't all be gone. Where were they? Where had they gone? And then I heard it. Distant but growing closer, the sound of voices, many voices, shouting, yelling, the sound of a crowd. I ran toward it, following the noise like a beacon. 2 blocks north, then left. The voices getting louder, clearer. I could make out individual words now. Angry words, frightened words. I turned the corner onto the main street and stopped dead. The entire neighborhood was there. Everyone. Hundreds of people crowded into the street, forming a loose circle around something in the center. Most were in their night clothes, pajamas, nightgowns, underwear. Some had grabbed bathrobes or thrown on shirts. A few were completely naked, not caring, too focused on whatever was in the center of the circle. They were shouting, not in unison, just chaos. Individual voices rising and falling, creating a wall of sound that was more noise than language, and in the center of that circle, tied to the old oak tree that marked the corner of Calle Obregón and Avenida Cinco el Patron. It was still intact, still whole despite everything. But now it was wrapped in thick rope loops and loops of it, binding it to the tree trunk. Its arms were pinned to its sides. Its legs were tied together. Even its head had been lashed back against the bark, preventing any movement. The tree itself was on fire, not fully engulfed, not yet. But flames licked up the trunk from its base, orange and yellow tongues reaching higher with each passing second. Smoke poured upward, thick and black. Someone had doused the tree in gasoline before lighting it. I could see the plastic gas cans lying discarded on the street, could smell the petroleum mixing with the wood smoke, and El Patron was burning with it. The flames had reached its feet now, catching on the cloth of its pants. The fabric blackened and curled, releasing more of that black smoke. The fire climbed higher, reaching its torso, its chest. Even bound and burning, it moved. Small movements, jerks and twitches. Its fingers flexed inside the ropes, its head strained against the bonds holding it to the tree, trying to turn, trying to look at its executioners. The faceless head tracked across the crowd, that eyeless gaze somehow seeing all of us, marking us, remembering us. I pushed through the outer edge of the crowd, desperate to find my mother. Mama Esperanza, where are you? No one paid attention to me. They were all fixated on the burning doll on the fire, consuming the tree, on the smoke rising into the pre-dawn sky. I shoved past a woman in curlers, past a man holding a screaming baby, past a group of teenagers watching with wide eyes and excited expressions like this was entertainment. Esperanza. I screamed her name now, not caring how desperate I sounded. And then came the explosion. Someone had placed dynamite at the base of the tree. Old mining dynamite, probably. The kind you could still buy if you knew the right people, if you were willing to pay cash and not ask questions. The blast was enormous. A column of fire shot 20 feet into the air. The shock wave hit me in the chest like a physical blow, knocking me backward into the people behind me. My ears rang high-pitched and painful, drowning out all other sound. Chunks of burning wood flew in every direction. People screamed and ducked and covered their heads with their arms. A piece of bark the size of my hand landed near my feet, still smoldering. When the smoke cleared enough to see, the tree was gone, not destroyed, gone. Reduced to a blackened stump and a crater in the ground where its roots had been. Debris scattered across a 30-foot radius, small fires burning where hot fragments had landed. And somewhere in that crater, somewhere in that pile of ash and charred wood and melted rope, El Patron, or what remained of it. The crowd began to disperse. Slowly at first, people backing away from the heat, then faster as the reality of what they'd done sank in. Families grabbed their children. Couples clutched each other. Individuals drifted away toward their homes, silent now, the shouting replaced by shocked quiet. I heard fragments of conversation as people passed me. It's dead now. Has to be dead. Nothing could survive that. But no one sounded relieved. They sounded terrified. Like they'd just done something unforgivable and were only now realizing the magnitude of it. I continued searching faces, looking for my mother's. The crowd thinned around me, 50 people, 30, 20. And then I saw someone I recognized, Don Esteban, the old man whose house I checked earlier. I grabbed his arm. Don Esteban. "Have you seen my mother, Esperanza Reyes?" He looked at me with eyes that seemed to be seeing through me rather than at me. "No one saw anyone," he said, his voice flat. "We just heard screaming, and then we ran outside and it was there." "What do you mean it was there?" "El Patron. It was just standing in the street, and then it—" He stopped shaking. "It did something. To Pedro. To Maria. I saw—" His voice broke. "I saw it tear Maria in half like she was made of paper." Maria. The woman I'd found in the cornfield, ripped in half exactly the same way Don Esteban was describing. "Did you see what happened to it?" I asked. "After it killed them?" Don Esteban shook his head. "It just walked away. Walked into the shadows like it was going home. That's when someone said we should catch it. Someone said we should burn it. And we all just—" He gestured helplessly at the smoking crater. "We all agreed. Like it was the most natural thing in the world." He pulled his arm free from my grip and walked away, moving like a man in a dream. I turned back to the crater, drawn to it despite myself. A few people still stood nearby, staring at the wreckage. The fires were dying down now, the fuel consumed, leaving just glowing embers and that terrible black smoke. I should go home, should keep looking for my mother, should do something useful, but I couldn't move. Couldn't stop staring at the crater where El Patron had burned, because I didn't believe it was dead. Couldn't believe it. Not after everything I'd seen tonight. Not after watching Ricardo shoot it and having the damage appear on Ricardo's body instead. Not after the way it had moved, the way it had survived being dumped on the roadside, the way it had torn a grown woman in half with what must have been its bare cloth hands. You can't kill something like that with fire. You can't kill it at all. But I didn't say this out loud, didn't voice my doubts. I just stood there in the pre-dawn darkness, watching the smoke rise, and wondered where my mother was. The crowd had almost completely dispersed when I finally turned away. Maybe 20 people left, scattered in small groups, talking in low voices. The sky was starting to lighten in the east. Sunrise was maybe an hour away. I walked back toward my house, moving slowly now, exhaustion hitting me like a physical weight. I hadn't slept, hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon. My clothes were stiff with dried blood. Ricardo's blood, Maria's blood, probably maybe some of my own from the cuts on my face. I smelled like smoke and death and fear. The front door of my house was still open. Still that 6 inches of darkness, that invitation to something wrong. I pushed it open fully and stepped inside. "Mama, are you back?" Sound from above. A scraping sound like something heavy being dragged across a wooden floor. I looked up at the ceiling. The sound was coming from above. From the roof, We had a flat roof accessible by an exterior staircase. We used it for drying clothes, for storing things we didn't have room for inside. I'd been up there maybe twice in the last year, but my mother went up there regularly. She liked it up there, she said. Liked being able to see the whole neighborhood like the breeze that was always stronger above the buildings. I went outside and climbed the metal staircase, my footsteps ringing on the treads. The sky was definitely lighter now. That gray period before sunrise, when everything loses its color, becomes just shades of darkness. At the top of the stairs I found her. Esperanza sat with her back against the low wall that ringed the roof, knees pulled up to her chest, arms wrapped around her legs. She stared straight ahead at nothing. "Mama?" I ran to her, dropping to my knees, grabbing her shoulders. "Are you hurt? What happened? Why are you up here?" She looked at me slowly, as if waking from a dream. Her eyes were red but dry. She'd been crying but had no tears left. "Miguel," she said softly, "you're covered in blood." "It's not mine. Most of it isn't mine. Mama, what happened? Where have you been?" She pulled her jacket tighter around herself, even though the temperature was mild. "I was hiding." "From what? From El Patron?" She nodded. "Tell me what happened, please." She took a shaky breath and began to speak. "I heard something outside, around 3 in the morning, footsteps, someone running, fast like they were being chased. I thought someone was hurt or in trouble, so I went to the door. My stomach clenched. You opened the door. I didn't turn on the lights," she said quickly, as if that would make it better. "I didn't want, if someone was chasing them, I didn't want to signal which house they went into. I just opened the door. And they came in. Yes." Her voice was barely above a whisper now. "They stepped inside, into the darkness, and stood there. Right behind the door, maybe 5 feet from me." She hugged herself tighter. "I couldn't see the face, just the shape, a person, just standing, not moving, not saying anything. I thought it was a man, a real man, someone who needed help. So I told it that it was safe here, that no one would find him, that he could stay." Tears started flowing again, cutting tracks through the dust on her face. "Then I turned on the light. And I saw it." Her voice broke completely. "No face, just cloth and stitching, like a doll. But it was looking at me, Miguel. I don't know how, but it was looking at me. And I knew, I recognized it, from the stories my grandmother told me, from the warnings we heard in the village when I was a child. El Patron, the thing that walks, the thing that judges. So I ran, up the stairs, through the hallway, up here, and I locked the door behind me. But it didn't follow." She shook her head. "No, that's the strange part. I waited up here for hours, listened, heard nothing, no footsteps, no knocking, it just stood there," I finished, "in the living room, all night." "How did you know?" "There's a burn mark on the floor, where it was standing." She closed her eyes. "When I heard the explosion, I knew it was over, knew they'd killed it, so I came down to check. And it was gone. The door was still open, but the thing El Patron, it wasn't there anymore, just that mark on the floor." We sat in silence for a moment, the city beginning to wake around us. Roosters crowing in distant yards. The first cars starting up engines, coughing to life. "Mama," I said carefully, "do you understand what this means, that you let it in, that you invited it?" She looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Fear, maybe, or hope, or both. "In the stories," she said slowly, "there are rules. Those who help El Patron are blessed. Those who try to kill it are cursed." She paused. "But I don't know what happens next, what the blessing means, what the price will be." I thought about Ricardo, his hand blown off by his own shotgun. About Maria torn in half in the cornfield. About all the people who had stood in that crowd tonight watching El Patron burn. How many of them would die in the next year? And my mother, who had opened our door and let it in, who had offered it safety without knowing what it was, would she be blessed? Or would there be a price for that blessing that we couldn't yet see? "We should go inside," I said. "Get cleaned up, try to rest." She nodded and let me help her to her feet. We descended the metal stairs together, moving slowly, both of us exhausted beyond measure. At the bottom she paused, looked back up at the roof as if something might be up there. Then she looked at me. "Don't tell anyone about this," she said. "About me letting it in. Promise me, Miguel." "Why not?" "Because I don't know what it means yet." What happens next? And I don't want people to know until I do. I wanted to argue, wanted to say that people had a right to know, that maybe the priest could help, that surely someone understood these old rituals better than we did. But I looked at her face, pale, exhausted, frightened, and I couldn't do it. "I promise," I said. We went inside. The burn mark was still there on the floor, darker now in the growing dawn light. We both stopped to stare at it for a moment. It looked like a brand, a mark of ownership, or a promise of something yet to come. Esperanza walked past it carefully, giving it a wide berth, and went to her bedroom. I heard the door close softly. I stood in the living room alone, looking at that mark, wondering what the hell we'd gotten ourselves into. Outside the sun was rising, a new day beginning on November 1st, 1978. But I had the feeling that last night hadn't really ended, that it would never really end. That El Patron, burned, destroyed, blown apart, was somehow still out there, still watching, still keeping score. The sun came up on November 1st, 1978, but it brought no comfort, just harsh light that made the burn mark on our floor look darker, more permanent. I didn't sleep, couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Maria torn in half. Saw Ricardo's hand lying in the dirt, still gripping the shotgun. Saw that faceless head turning slowly to look at me with eyes that didn't exist. Around noon, I forced myself to shower. The water ran brown and red as Ricardo's blood washed off my skin. I scrubbed until my skin was raw, but I could still smell it. Copper and iron and death. I put on clean clothes and went to check on Ricardo at the hospital. Carmen was still there, sitting in the same plastic chair, looking like she hadn't moved in 8 hours. Maybe she hadn't. Her eyes were hollow, red-rimmed. She looked up when I approached, but didn't seem to fully recognize me at first. "How is he?" I asked. "They saved his life," she said, her voice hoarse from crying. "They closed the wound, gave him blood. He'll live." She paused, staring at her hands. "But his hand is gone. They can't reattach it. It was too damaged. Too much time passed." "I'm sorry. He won't talk," she continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "The doctors say he's in shock. They gave him sedatives. But even when he's awake, he just stares. Won't say a word, won't even look at me." I sat down beside her. We didn't speak for several minutes. Finally, Carmen asked, "Did they kill it? Did they burn it?" "Yes." "Are you sure?" I thought about the explosion, the fire, the crater where the tree had been. "I don't know," I admitted. "I want to say yes, but I don't know." Carmen nodded slowly. "I don't think it can be killed," she whispered. Over the following weeks, the neighborhood tried to return to normal. Police came to investigate the deaths. Maria, Pedro Salazar, 2 others I hadn't known about. They ruled them as animal attacks. Wild dogs, maybe. Or a large cat that had wandered in from the mountains. No one corrected them. No one mentioned El Patron. It was as if we'd all made a silent agreement not to speak of it, not to remember it, to pretend it had never happened. The burn mark on our floor remained. My mother scrubbed it with every cleaning product we owned. She tried sanding the wood, even poured bleach on it, which ruined the finish but didn't touch the mark itself. It stayed, dark and permanent, a constant reminder. But something else was changing too. Something I noticed gradually over days and then weeks. My mother's luck was improving. It started small. Father Martinez called her to his office 2 weeks after that night. When she came home, she was smiling for the first time since the incident. "He's making my position official," she said, almost disbelieving. "Full-time, with a salary, with benefits. Health insurance, Miguel. We'll have health insurance." The next week, a letter arrived from Michoacan, from a cousin she hadn't spoken to in 15 years. Inside was a check for 500 pesos. "He says he's been meaning to repay an old debt," my mother said, staring at the check like it might disappear. I'd completely forgotten about it. I thought he'd never pay. With that money, we fixed the house, proper glass in the windows, repairs to the roof so it no longer lifted in the wind, a new door for the back entrance one with a solid deadbolt lock. The landlord, Senor Vega, stopped coming around to threaten us. When my mother went to pay the back rent we owed, he waved it away. "Don't worry about it," he said. "Times are hard for everyone. Just keep current from now on." The neighbors started to notice. They'd stop my mother on the street, comment on how well she looked, how things seemed to be going her way. "Esperanza has the golden touch," I heard Senora Gutierrez say to another neighbor. "Everything she touches turns out right." But they didn't know. None of them knew that she'd opened our door that night, that she'd invited El Patron inside, that while they were burning it, destroying it, cursing themselves, she was being blessed. I watched it happen with growing unease. Every stroke of good fortune felt wrong somehow, tainted, like we were profiting from something terrible while others suffered, because they were suffering. Ricardo never recovered, not really. Carmen brought him home from the hospital after 2 weeks, but he wasn't the same man. He sat in a chair by the window all day, staring out at nothing, his bandaged stump resting in his lap. He never spoke, not one word. The doctor said there was no physical reason for it, no brain damage, no injury to his throat or vocal cords. He simply chose silence. 3 months later, Ricardo and Carmen moved away. She came to say goodbye, looking years older than she had before that night. "We're going to Guadalajara," she told my mother. "My sister lives there. She can help us." "I'm so sorry," my mother said. Carmen just nodded. "Watch yourself, Esperanza. Sometimes blessings have prices we don't see right away." Then she was gone. The families of the dead left too. Maria's husband, Pedro Salazar's widow. One by one they packed up and moved away, unable to bear living in the neighborhood where their loved ones had died such horrible deaths. New families moved in to take their places. People who didn't know what had happened that October night, who didn't know about El Patron. Life moved forward. The calendar turned to December. A new year began, 1979. My mother continued to prosper. She started buying houses, small properties in poor neighborhoods, places she could afford with her improved income and unexpected inheritance money that kept arriving from distant relatives who suddenly remembered old debts. She rented these houses out, made money, bought more houses. "You have such a good head for business," people said, "such a natural talent." But I knew the truth. This wasn't talent. This was the blessing. The reward for opening our door, for offering shelter to something that should never have been welcomed anywhere. I found a job finally. A good one at a textile factory, better than the one I'd been fired from. The interviewer liked me, immediately hired me on the spot, offered a wage higher than I'd dared hope for. Was that part of the blessing too extended to me because I was my mother's son? I didn't know. Didn't want to know. October 1979 approached. 1 year since that night. The anniversary loomed in my mind like a storm on the horizon. Would the blessing end? Would the curse that had been promised to those who tried to kill El Patron finally come due? On October 31st, exactly 1 year later, Don Esteban threw a party. Not a big party, just neighbors. 15 or 20 people gathering at his house to drink and celebrate the Day of the Dead, to remember family members who had passed on. My mother and I were invited. She wanted to go, said it would be rude to refuse, would make people suspicious if we declined. I didn't want to go. Every instinct I had screamed warning. But I couldn't articulate why without telling her my fears, and my fears sounded insane even inside my own head. So we went. Don Esteban's house was warm, crowded with people I recognized from the neighborhood. Some had been there that night a year ago. Others were new arrivals who knew nothing of what had happened. There was food, music playing from a radio, bottles of tequila and beer being passed around. It should have felt festive. But something was wrong. I felt it the moment we walked in a discordance in the air like a note played slightly off-key. Don Esteban handed me a glass of tequila, clear liquid, slightly cloudy. "To the neighborhood," he said, raising his own glass. "To survival." Everyone raised their glasses, including my mother. I looked down at mine. The tequila looked wrong somehow, too thick, too viscous. "I'm okay," I said, setting the glass down on a table. "I'm not drinking tonight." Don Esteban shrugged and drank his own glass in one swallow. Around the room, others did the same. My mother raised hers to her lips. I grabbed her wrist. "Don't!" She looked at me surprised. "What's wrong?" "Just don't. Trust me. Don't drink it." She stared at me for a long moment, then slowly lowered her glass, set it on a table without drinking. 10 minutes later, Senora Gutierrez collapsed. Not gradually, not a slow sink to the floor. She simply dropped like someone had cut her strings. One moment standing, talking, laughing. The next moment on the floor, her body convulsing, foam bubbling from her mouth. Then Javier, the young man from the market. Then Don Felipe, the old man who played dominoes. One by one, the people who had drunk the tequila began to fall. Screaming started, people running to help, to call for ambulances, to do something. But there was nothing to do, no way to help. Whatever was in that tequila was fast-acting and thorough. My mother and I backed toward the door. I grabbed her hand and pulled her outside, away from the chaos and death inside. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice high with panic. "I don't know. We need to go, now." We ran home, not stopping until we were inside with the door locked behind us. My mother's hands shook as she double-checked all the locks, tested them twice, 3 times. "That tequila," she said. "If you hadn't stopped me—" "I know." By morning, 9 people were dead. The news called it methanol poisoning. Someone had brought a bottle of contaminated alcohol, they said. A tragic accident. These things happen sometimes with bootleg liquor. But the people who had been there, the survivors, they knew better. Right before they died, in those final moments before the poison took them completely, every single victim had coughed up black smoke. Thick smoke that smelled like burning wood. The smoke had poured from their mouths, their noses, pouring out like they were chimneys, like they were burning from the inside. And when the smoke cleared, they were dead. The funerals happened over 2 days. 9 people buried, 9 families destroyed. I went to Senora Gutierrez's funeral. She'd been kind to us over the years, always had a smile for my mother, always stopped to chat when they met on the street. The cemetery was full. Family had come from all over Mexico City, from other states. The priest gave the service. People wept. I stood toward the back with my mother, both of us paying our respects silently. And that's when I noticed it. The air. It was thick, heavy, taking on a yellowish tinge like dust suspended in light. The wind picked up, not strong, just persistent, blowing through the cemetery with a sound like distant whispers. My mother stood beside me, head bowed, praying. But she wasn't crying. Everyone else was crying, even the men, even the tough old guys who never showed emotion. Everyone wept for Senora Gutierrez and the others who had died. Everyone except my mother. I watched her from the corner of my eye. Her face was composed, peaceful almost. Her hands clasped in front of her lips, moving in silent prayer. But no tears, not one. As if she'd expected this, as if she'd known all along that this day would come. "Do you think this happened because they killed El Patron?" I asked quietly as we walked back to the car afterward. She didn't answer for a long time. We were almost home before she finally spoke. "I don't know, Miguel. I truly don't know. But you have a guess." She was quiet for another moment. Then they stood in the street that night. They watched it burn. They cheered when the dynamite went off. Maybe that was enough. But Ricardo lost his hand immediately. Why did these 9 die a year later? I don't know. Maybe there are different kinds of punishment. Maybe the curse is slower for some, gives them time to forget, to feel safe, and then it takes them anyway. We walked in silence. "Are we safe?" I asked. "I think so. I hope so." But she didn't sound certain. Weeks passed, then months, The neighborhood slowly recovered. New people moved in. Life continued. My mother's prosperity continued too. More houses purchased, more money earned. And I watched and said nothing and wondered what the final price would be. It was 3 weeks ago when it started again. I came home late from work. The front door was closed and locked. Normal. I used my key to let myself in. The house was dark. My mother had already gone to bed. I went to the kitchen to get water, poured a glass from the tap, drank it standing at the sink. That's when I heard it. A sound from the front door, a creaking sound, wood under stress, like someone was pressing against it from outside. I froze. The sound came again. The door was being tested. Something was pushing on it, gently checking to see if it was locked. The door handle began to turn, slowly, deliberately. But the door was solid now. The locks were new and strong. They held. The handle stopped turning. Silence for a moment. Then footsteps. Walking away from the door, but not leaving. Walking around the side of the house toward the back. I ran to the back door, confirming it was locked. It was. Deadbolt engaged. The footsteps stopped outside. The handle rattled once, twice. The door held. The footsteps moved away, circling the house, checking each window in turn, but everything was secured now. New latches, bars on the accessible windows. Nothing could get in. The footsteps completed their circuit and stopped at the front door again. One final push against the wood. One last test. Then they walked away. Down our front path, out to the street, fading. I stood in the living room breathing hard, staring at the front door. I went to check the peephole. The street was empty, but on the door on the outside, visible through the peephole, there was something new. A handprint, dark like charcoal, burned into the paint, fingers spread wide. From upstairs from my mother's bedroom, I heard a sound. Footsteps. Not my mother's footsteps. These were heavier, deliberate. Crack, crack, crack. Slow, measured steps across her bedroom floor. "Mama," I called up the stairs. The footsteps stopped. Silence. I forced myself to climb the stairs. At the top, I looked toward my mother's room. Her door was closed. Light showed under it. I could hear breathing, heavy breathing from inside her room. I opened the door. My mother was in bed asleep, peaceful. The room was empty, but the floorboards near her bed were warm, heat radiating from them, and in the air, faint but unmistakable, the smell of wood smoke. I backed out and closed the door, went to my own room, locked my door, sat on my bed in the darkness, listening. Footsteps in the hallway outside my room. Crack, 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 coming closer, stopping outside my door, breathing right outside. Then a voice. "Miguel." Not my mother's voice, just sound shaped into my name. "Miguel, do you remember me?" I couldn't speak. "I remember you. You were there. You watched." Silence. "But you didn't try to stop them. You didn't try to help. You just watched." "What does that make you, Miguel?" I found my voice. "What do you want?" "I want to know if your mother is ready." "Ready for what?" "For the next year, the next blessing." My blood went cold. She invited me in. She offered shelter. She received her blessing. 9 died for it. That was the balance. And now the year has turned. The blessing is ending, and she must choose. Choose what? Whether to open the door again, whether to accept another blessing and another prize. And if she doesn't, then the blessing ends, just ends. No harm, no curse. She returns to what she was before. But if she does, then 9 more will die next year, to balance the blessing. I was shaking. That's murder. Is it? She doesn't kill them. I kill them. She just opens a door. Are you any better than her living in this house, working that job you got so easily? Building your life on those 9 deaths? I couldn't answer. I'll be back tomorrow night, the voice said, and the night after, testing the doors. Waiting to see if she'll let me in. She doesn't have to choose tonight, but eventually she will choose. The footsteps moved away, back down the hallway, down the stairs. Silence. That was 3 weeks ago. Every night since I've heard the footsteps. Sometimes outside testing doors and windows, sometimes inside walking through rooms, sometimes right outside my door. My mother grows more tired each day. the weight of the decision crushing her. Last night I woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Crack, crack, crack. They stopped at my mother's door. I heard the door open. I heard my mother's voice soft and welcoming. "Come in, please. You're safe here." The footsteps entered her room. The door closed. And I lay in my bed knowing she'd made her choice, knowing that 9 more people would die this year, knowing that I was going to let it happen. Because I'm weak, because I like having money, because I can't face going back to the way things were. I'm telling you this story now as a warning. In Mexican folklore, El Patron never truly dies. It just waits, it watches. It finds new neighborhoods, new victims, new people desperate enough to open their doors. And once you let it in, once you accept what it offers you, it can never close that door again. Check your doors tonight. Check your locks. And if someone comes knocking in the middle of the night needing shelter, look carefully at who's asking to come in, because some invitations can never be taken back.